Let's switch gears now. So much we've gotten from this election, so much activity. Still, the process is still ongoing. Voting is completed within most of the areas, but election, you know, is not just voting. There's the collation and then the eventual result announcement. And we're joined by three experts who have been following elections in Nigeria for years now, and this just adds to that long list of elections they have covered, they have given reports on, and even come up with innovations. IRAD is one of them. We're joined by three of them, as I said. Cynthia Bamalu is a programs director at Yaga Africa, joining us from our Abuja studio. And next to her is Mr. Ezenwa Wago. He's an IRAD analyst and a chair partner for electoral reform. Good evening. Good morning, actually. I need to get used to that. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. And here in our Lagos studio is Mr. Larry Arogundade. He's an IRAD analyst and executive director, IPC, that's the International Press Center.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, we had you yesterday on the program, and we're talking about our expectations for this election. But before I come to you, I mean, we're gentlemen here, so let's begin with Cynthia.
Wow.
I know that Yaga came up with some preliminary reports, some sort of look into how the process had gone. I think it was about 1 p.m. that report came through. And I'd like you to just, elections, or at least voting is over. Just maybe walk us through from the PVT and all of the other monitors you had across the country. How would you describe the process? That's for Cynthia, by the way.
Yeah, I think one thing we did observe. Yeah, one thing we did observe from this election was one, this was a marked improvement compared to the presidential election, especially when it came to logistics management. So when it issues around arrival of officials and commencement of the process. So Yaga Africa deployed PVT in 3 states, in Benue, in Delta, in Kano State. However, we also have observers deployed across the other states where we had governorship elections. And the idea for the deployment is for the PVT states, we can give statistically representative data on the process itself. However, for the other states, it's more around traditional observation. But one thing we did record in this election is that for commencement, we had earlier commencement of polls. So for instance, you had states like Kano, as at 9:30, you had about 80% of polling unit that had commenced voting and accreditation. And same also in Benue, and Delta was the only state that had about 79% commencement rate as at 9:30 a.m. Across the other states also, we did receive reports of early commencement of polls. Now, one thing that was quite significant was we had less reports of polling units where there were insufficient elections materials. Unlike the presidential elections, where we had some locations where some things like the ballot paper were not complete and the voters had to protest for them to be complete, or things like indelible ink or the ink pad missing. We didn't get much of those reports here. What was quite significant here beyond was issues around and I think it's more around deployment or mismatch of ballot paper, and it was covered already in Benue. In Benue, one of the local governments, you had ballot papers not allocated to the right polling unit. We did receive reports in some locations in Plateau State where BVAS machines from one location were deployed to other locations. Now, the challenge with that is, as you know about the BVAS, it is configured to polling units. And so if a BVAS allocated to a particular polling unit is sent to the wrong polling unit, it will not function because it is configured to polling, so it's location specific. And so at the commencement of polls from the morning till noon and midday, we did have a reasonably, how would I put it, a reasonably quiet system. Voting was going on, and then you had voters who turned out to vote, although not in high numbers, which was projected. However, there were reports of critical incidents, as at that 1 p.m. we had received about 54 confirmed critical incidents across the country, and a lot of those reports came in more from Kano and Lagos State. We did receive reports from Rivers State, and basically reports around thugs disrupting the process, intimidation of voters, and in one particular location in Kano, we had DSS operatives intimidating party agents in some of the locations. And I think that has been one major issue when it came to critical incidents. One major incident we've received from the states where we have our observers deployed. And I know there have been conversations around what happens next, because at the end of the day, it's beyond just the disruption. It's about how the security agents address that, which brings me to the deployment of security agents. And I think for this election, it was we were expecting to have more deployments of security personnel across polling units. However, our data showed that for Benue, Delta, and Kano, where we have representative data, security personnel were deployed in about 88 and 87% of polling units. And we did not have locations where we have personnel deployed at least in 99% of polling units, which is the expectation, because based on the security plan, the police had shared that working with sister agencies, that you would have at least 2 personnel across respective polling units where elections will be going on. And so we had those reports indicating that there were locations where we did not have security personnel. Also, our reports from our mobile observers in respective states did indicate that there were locations where security personnel were not deployed. And so it's not surprising to see incidents of destruction of the process, incidents of voter intimidation in some polling units. Because if you don't have sufficient deployment, if you don't have adequate and efficient deployment, there's a likelihood that thugs would want to disrupt the process. So that was also one thing we had also observed. And then the additional part in the incident beyond the disruption were locations where party agents were interfering with the process. In fact, for one of the polling units, you had party agents collecting ballot papers from the voters and voting for them. So you thumbprint and give to the party agents, and they insert in the ballot box. While in some locations, you had party agents trying to influence how voters vote where they are at the voting cubicle. That for us is a major issue to look out for, especially as it relates to the secrecy of the ballots, because the idea of deploying party agents to polling units is to have them at the polling units observing and protecting the vote of their party, observing to ensure that the guidelines and procedures are adhered to, not to interfere with the process. So when you have party agents interfering with how voters vote, or even trying to influence how voters vote, or trying to take over the process, that becomes a major threat to the secrecy of the ballot in those locations where those observations were seen. So like this were just the general observation in the based on our media analysis. We're still observing the process. Because we had reasonably records of early commencement of polls, we also had polling units closing earlier in different locations across the country. Remember, this election is happening in different parts of the country, the governorship in 28 states. And so if you look at the general or an overview, we can say we did have a marked improvement from the last elections of 25th February 2023. Counting is ongoing, collation is ongoing. We have observers deployed across the LGA collation centers. Results are coming in already. There are locations where voting did not hold today, and we expect that INEC would communicate to Nigerians on what days elections would hold. We expect voting to commence in some locations tomorrow, and then subsequently would also confirmed from INEC for those locations where materials were mismatched or sent to the wrong location, what the issues or how INEC intends to address those issues. But I think largely we've had some reasonable progress from what we had before. Aside incidents of violence in some locations, I think I forgot to mention Rivers, because Rivers is one location where we've received reports of intimidation of voters, reports of destruction of the process. And Rivers, I think, is becoming part of the electoral system, that almost every elections, you have serious reports from Rivers State where either voters are intimidated, or you have personnel kidnapped or locked up, or even have the collation process disrupted. If you remember in 2019, Rivers was one state where you had military officials disrupting process in some collation centers, observers and media not even granted access to observe collation. And so it's not surprising to see that this trend has remained consistent in this electoral cycle. The presidential elections and now in the governorship elections, we're also getting these kinds of reports. And from Rivers State, we're hoping that the security agencies are alert and up to task to secure lives and property, especially as collation continues, because we know that collation is usually a bit more volatile, and at that point it gets dark because collation goes into the night. Once events go into the night, it becomes a bit more vulnerable for observers, for media, and for citizens who want to observe the process of collation.
Cynthia, for that detailed observations there. But let me come to Mr. Ezenwa Nwagu. Mr. Ezenwa, so, you know, looking at the history of elections in Nigeria and, you know, this issue of thuggery, looking at where we're coming from and where we are now, would you say the thugs are getting more bold? Are they getting bolder? And are they getting more powerful, you know, at this time? You know, just looking back, you know, to where we're coming from and where we are now.
Well, I think that we've made some progress in terms of our management of elections. If you ask me about where we are coming from a place where we were not conducting elections in the true sense. We didn't have an authentic voter register. We had shoddy preparations for elections. Nobody could curb the negative attitude of the politicians. Their verbiage was incendiary to the extent that even the president of the country had to come and say for him and his party that the elections were do or die. We had clear disrespect for processes and all of that. So, but as we speak now, the role of social media accentuates some of the issues that you are dealing with in a way that makes it look like progress has not been made. And I was discussing with my colleague Cynthia while we were here. I was asking her, I said, what is the number of polling units that you have in Lagos? And what are the locations of these polling units? How does the current narrative connect to the fact that there are places in this same Lagos where votes were conducted seamlessly? Voters voted without harassment, without intimidation. Are we able to put out those ones? Why are we fixated on those places where things did not go well? And of course, that is what people are hungry for. People are not hungry for where it went well. And what is the percentage of the places where it went well and where it didn't go well? I think when we are able to do that and then compare it to communities where these elections also held that have no internet penetration, where perhaps activities of this nature may have also happened and they are not in the public domain. So we are coming from a place where the politicians have continued really to be absent, and I make that point very, very seriously, that they've made themselves completely absent from any conversation around reform. The attitudes that they carried over is one that they continually want to have dubious advantage in terms of how they assess power. So the disconnect is that the people who have responsibility to referee their activities are wearing the jersey sometimes of the players that they are supposed to be refereeing their matches, and that is the security agencies. I've listened to Ndu and all the explanations he gave. My sense is that until the security agencies understand that they have a responsibility to maintain law and order, And the lawyer who you were with previously was talking about the Electoral Act. But the police, beyond the Electoral Act, and I think we've made this point at some point, have responsibility to enforce all laws. It has nothing to do with whether it's election or no election. The crimes that are being committed are crimes against the state. For me, it doesn't matter whether it's happening during the elections. So whether you are talking of the periods of 1990, Omoboriowo and the rest of them, it is a failure of security provisioning. And until we begin to match service delivery with value for money, and that for me is where the challenge is. We deploy security men, they are paid allowances, and then when they fail in their responsibilities, we are not able to hold them out. The lessons and the audit from the 25th February election is the reason why we have a punctuality index that is a bit heartwarming in the governorship election, because we held INEC on the issue of logistics, we held them on the issue of opening of the polls on time, and the rest of them. They had to go back and introspect, and what they did was to see whether there can be some atonement for the issues that happened on the 25th. But we don't see that with security agents. The Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security will hold meetings, will bring out their programs, and at the end of the day, there is no audit as to what has happened. So history is important only to the point that it teaches you a lesson to correct the future. But we seem in the area of security, in the area of protection of life and properties of our citizens, not to be learning any lesson. And the reason why that continues is because we just continually hoist a regime of excuses why they can't perform. Oh, the number is not adequate to deal with these issues. But like you said in one of your conversations, the security architecture for elections is such that there has to be a fallback. If the guy owning the polling unit is without arms, he can call for help. And there are two other layers of help that he can call. We have never seen them do that. That help has never been called to assist them at any point in time. And the commissioners, the DPOs, the other people who have responsibility for the areas where these infractions are going on are never invited for questioning. The police officers who are posted, the security agents who are posted to those polling units are known. They have a name tag. They know where they are posted to. Why is it that at the end of the elections, nobody says in Agor Palace, who is the DPO in charge of Agor Palace? What happened? Is it possible we understand what happened, why people who live in that area can be intimidated to the point where they are not able to come out to vote because the security did not give them confidence that their lives will be protected. So for me, it's a failure of security provisioning, because election is a law-determined thing, and those who have responsibility to enforce the law shirk their responsibilities and hoist regime of excuses why they are not able to do what they are doing, and we let them go. But we oversight INEC to the point where they are making changes, they are responding to us, and even communicating why they didn't do well and what they will need to do afterwards. But that doesn't happen with other stakeholders. The political parties, their candidates, and their misbehavior. We over-respect them to the point where we even give them platforms to excuse themselves. The politicians, INEC has set up a polling unit, has put its officials there, and then you mobilize talks to go and disrupt the process, and nobody will hold any party accountable. And what you see is that you are talking about Lagos. The dominant party in every state is guilty of the same things. If you go to the places where PDP is dominant, they are not in any way different from what the APC is doing in their state. If you go to another place where, in fact, there are even people who are not politicians who have direct control over security because of their deep pockets and the overt relationship they have and control over the security agents. So we need to spread the tar in a way that calls out the fact that the politicians and their candidates are also complicit and responsible for the kind of challenges that we have. And we need to call them out and also hold them accountable.
Mr. Nwagu, I mean, I listened carefully to you. I also listened to Cynthia. All of the things that you both have mentioned are things that have happened in past elections, 2019 elections, 2015 elections, all of these infractions that you made mention of, lack of security deployment, party agents, helping people to cast their ballots and all of these things. And I'm wondering, I mean, in the course of your duty, always, you liaise with INEC, you liaise with the security as well. And I'm thinking, to what extent have you persisted in terms of all of your reports, your post-election reports, in terms of these reports being implemented, in further elections so that we don't see a repeat of what we see? Because as they say, if you keep doing the same thing the same way, you definitely will not see a different result. And that's why we're here today. I mean, so it happened in 2015, it happened in 2011, it happened in 2019, it happened on the 25th of February, and it's happening today again. So what can we do differently? Civil society, how much persistence do you make, when you're liaising with INEC, with security, in terms of, elections that will be coming, in the future, to ensure that all of these things that you take note of, are put into consideration, before the conduct of future elections?
Well, I think that for us, we will, of course, do reflections, take much more time to reflect on what has happened in the course of both the presidential, National Assembly, and the state House of Assembly elections. But remember that we are twins with the media. You also help us to amplify some of these issues. We have a scanning tool that we presented to the public, the EMRI, the Election Manipulation Risk Index, which was put out there. If you go and take the first iteration, the second iteration, you will be shocked that perhaps almost 90% of what is in that EMRI played out without, and those were, I mean, channels put a lot of effort in publicizing the EMRI. We thought that election management bodies, the security agencies, would take that scanning tool and use it to ensure that the remit for us as civil society is advocacy, to push these issues to the front burner in a way that duty managers can then harvest some of these things and take what they think is useful. If you remember in Osun, I don't know if you followed the process, we had this meeting with the DIG operations then, Mr. Kokumo, and we were raising these issues, and he says, oh, every issue public relations, negative, defensive public relations is what you have from public officials in Nigeria. They live in perpetual state of denial, always telling you that, oh no, you didn't bring it up, we were not aware, we didn't know. But all of these issues are already in the public space. The reports that you are talking about, whether the midterm report, take for instance, the commissioner in Bauchi State, who was serving, who was on the line, on a polling line, sharing money to prospective voters with policemen surrounding him. You don't need a report on that. All that people needed to do was those who were in Bauchi, who knew that location, the security agents would have just taken those people in. It would have served as a deterrent. You didn't wait, you need to investigate anything, because every report that has been issued in the course of this election, mid-situation report, I mean, touchlight that very infraction. But as you know, nothing will happen, no conversation. So we do the much that we can do. And in some significant way also, some of the reports have been used, especially by INEC. The question that you raised about people voting and going and then coming back is as a result of our engagement that has happened. Sometimes we don't like the chest thumping that comes with that, but perhaps the reports that we have issued in the past have impacted, elections very positively. And the Electoral Act 2022, most of the things that are in it are a product of election observation reports. Take, for instance, the issue of review by INEC of results that are gotten through duress or coercion. It was as a result of the observation of the Imo elections, where a sitting senator actually got his results through option AK-47. But the courts validated him, but INEC came back and said, no, if any of our officials is intimidated and he finds it that the result he made was made under duress, within 7 days we can review that result. That's some progress. Those are the things that it is as a result of the reports that we make that INEC is now being pushed on the first line charge, where it has to receive funding for 1 year before any elections, and all of those little progress. The issue of people living with disabilities, the idea of them now being provided with assistive materials as a matter of must, not whether the commission likes it or not. It now has a duty to make sure that it provides assistive materials. Those are all products of our engagement as civil society and the media. And it is important to know that our work brings the kind of progress that we have seen. But the people who have responsibility to take these things further, they are a bit reluctant, but we need to keep pushing them. We need to keep putting their foot on the fire and ensure that they do the right thing. And this democratic work, whether flawed or not, it is about a consistent work to continue to improve the system. And that's why we are not giving up. That's why at the end of the day, we will go back again and see what are the opportunities that all the experiences that we have had within this cycle of elections have provided, and see what other new reform issues that we can put on the front burner.
Well, I mean, if we were to go through that list, we probably will not leave here today. And I mean, a lot of people know about the option A4. It's quite new to hear the option AK-47, but it just, again, shows some of the challenges we've had to wade through in our process. Now, one of those other, innovations, or one of those other good fruits from collaborations is the ERAD, actually, Channels Television, in partnership with Yaga Africa, came up with this, as we call it, this revolutionary tool. So we can add this to that list of some of the good fruits that have come out of this. And just before we get into this, because this will form a major part of our analysis forward, let me bring in Mr. Arogundade. You have covered elections in this country. You've probably lost count of just how many you have covered. I know that we've talked about your expectations. Yes. Prior to this election. We've seen how this election was conducted. I just want to start from the end and maybe work our way backwards. Is this slower than you anticipated, especially seeing that it's Sunday morning and we've not really gotten any full picture from any state yet, especially because we had the Beavers, the IRF, and we thought those results would be uploaded as fast as possible, except for a few places where elections have not been conducted anyway. But majority of polling units, we've seen elections being conducted. So for you, is this moving as fast as you expected?
Well, that is moving at all. It's something that we perhaps should be happy about, right. Commend. This time around, we don't have the question of glitch or glitches. The results are being uploaded, and if we have some form of calm despite the skirmishes and violence, it's because people know that as they're watching us, they can have an idea of how this the parties and candidates are performing. They could go online on their own and check if they so wish. And for me, that is something that we wanted to happen, because the fact that it didn't happen in the other election constituted a setback, a kind of disappointment. And so let's see how it goes. Now, the issue really is also the fact that you have different situations in different parts. One of the problems that came up on February 25 was the question of internet access and accessibility, some not being able to upload. We also know that we've had some disruptions. Definitely it could be faster, and it would have been better if it was faster, so that we can know where we are as far as these results are concerned. You don't have this atmosphere of suspense in terms of where we're going. But having gotten to this stage, you can be sure that people really want to see how it finally, materializes, who is eventually declared, the winner. And like we always say, political parties that are quite serious, who really have agents in all the polling units, would by now have known, how, their, parties perform. Perhaps what they are waiting for is the official, confirmation after the conclusion of the entire, coalition, system. So in the aspect of, technology, the fact that Beavers, worked and we're having this uploading, we can say that we've made, some progress.
Okay, I like that you see the glass half full, not
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
half
so,
empty.
exactly.
Better than where we were 3 weeks ago.
So it's a case of half empty, half full. Let's agree that the glass is halfway.
Or at least there's something in the glass anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's walk through some of the trends, and it's something to hold on to for now. Some of the states are coming in, except for, Yobe, Kano, and Plateau. By the way, this is still early days. Okay, this is still very early. Over the course of a few minutes, hours, you see the map changing.
Sure.
So just to reiterate that for our viewers, as this is still early days, we'll just do an analysis of the trends we have seen so far. I'm tempted to start from Lagos, but let's keep that for much later and begin from, let's see, I'm spoiled for choice now. Okay, let's start from Borno State. It's one of the states, actually, that the incumbent is seeking a re-election. It's a state that has seen, years of terrorism. Victor, you have an experience.
First-hand experience.
First-hand experience, exactly. So maybe you should actually take this on, Victor, and talk about the trend we're seeing so far with the results.
So, it's Borno State traditionally, is still the way it used to be. So, we're trying to look at the trends from 1999. Then it was ANPP. APP, so it has always been like this. This party has always been, a ruling in Borno State. So I think except for 1999, which was the PDP, and then in 2003 it changed with Ali Modu Sheriff coming in. After Ali Modu Sheriff, we had the vice president-elect, of course, Kashmir Shettima, and then after him, we have Professor Babagana Zulum. The line has always remained governorship, even in local government elections, state assemblies, it's always, that's transition, ANPP, and it's always been, to CPC, APC to CPC and now APC. So it's always been like this. So I am actually not surprised. Even in the presidential elections on February 25th, the APC actually won. And one of the stats that we're pulling out then was like, he was the only vice presidential candidate who returned his state in terms of, electoral value. The vice presidential candidate of the PDP, couldn't deliver his state.
That's Delta State.
Yeah, Delta State. He couldn't deliver his state. So pretty much.
And that of the Labour Party.
Labour Party, exactly. He too couldn't deliver his state. So Borno State, very interesting state, but it's always been like this. So I'm really not surprised, at what I am seeing currently. It's pretty much it was always going to be like this. So I'm not surprised. You shouldn't have any worries. Like it is what it is. That's what it is. It's been like that since 2003.
Well, it's still early days, Victor.
It's still early days.
Say that
but
time and again.
Yeah,
the APC.
But I would still stick my neck and say it's going to remain red.
Well, don't forget that INEC is the only
I'm just saying.
So when you stick your neck, don't forget there's meant to be the eye before the neck.
Exactly.
So, that's
saying.
what you have, just a neck.
So you just look at that pattern.
Yeah.
Trust me.
It's still early days. We'll wait to see those results. We can wait. We waited for the presidential election.
For
how many days? 4 days.
No.
So hey, it's just a day. So let's just keep our tabs open and just watch how things are swinging. Mr. Rogadadi.
Just to make the point, we're talking about whether this thing was slow. Even when we had the elections in Osun State, which was just one state, I think we didn't have the final, declaration of the winner until the early hours of the following day. I think about 5, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., that was when, we finally got the entire results, and then, the INEC resident commissioner, the returning officer, declared that, Adeleke was the winner of that election. Now we're talking of, many states, about 28 states or thereabout, where we're having governorship elections and state assembly elections. So looking at the logistics of it, really, I don't think we're likely to have it, faster than when we were having a single state. So it's still not really too bad that, we're where we are at this point in time. And then for Borno State, I think for a state that has, the vice president-elect, and also, a governor that has, weathered the storm and have, let me say, possibly perception, because if you are not talking about facts, better you talk about, perception of perhaps, relative, performance and the rest of it. It's likely that you would see this kind of, trend, in the voting. If we look at all other, factors, because in a sense, there is a stake, for that state in governance in Nigeria now at the level of presidency.
Absolutely.
And, and others. And then if the governor is seen to have been able to weather the storm despite all things that are happening in that state, then it's quite possible that maybe they felt that there's, let's stay with this one that we know. That is hopefully maybe, doing, something for us.
So some sort of
Obviously,
stability.
of course, the opposition parties will know better about the internal dynamics, but this is just what we could say at the level of the factors that may be responsible for the trend that we are seeing, in the hope that maybe this is what would be the final, picture, because everything is still tentative until we have all the results coming.
And that's what we keep reiterating. Let's go to Abuja. Now, we started in Lagos because Lagos is seeing election action. But the nation's capital is not seeing anything. Even the state assemblies or the governorship, you already have your national assembly in the nation's capital. So that's why we started here in Lagos. But let me now take this to you, Cynthia. Taking a look at the trends, how these colors are coming up. I mean, we have, reds, we have greens, we have yellow and blue. Talk about a colorful nation. I think it just speaks to cultural diversity as well. But what do you make of this trend that we're seeing so far? It's still early days, as we've said.
Yes, you're right. Still early it's too early to call. However, if there's something we've learned from the presidential elections is that this is one election where we're beginning to see the power of the people prevail in the vote, and we're almost getting at least some level of accuracy in the votes cast, because with the technology deployed, it's becoming a bit more difficult for multiple voting. And so it's easier. You can actually say that votes are now counting in Nigeria's elections. And although for the governorship elections, I'm not really expecting a very colorful map as we had for the presidential elections. Remember that for the presidential elections, there was a lot around identity and personalities of candidates. For the governorship, the context is a bit more different, because the identities that play out, or the personalities that play out, are more local context, or rather driven by local context in the state. Meaning that there are certain states that voted in a particular pattern, or certain parties that took some states at the national presidential elections that may not likely take those states in the governorship elections. But I do expect some level of reasonable colors in the map. So if you look at the diversity across the geopolitical zones, we already know that for some, we're expecting to see parties like the NNPP pull certain weight in one or two states. We're not sure what that will be, but if you follow the results from the presidential elections, you could see that there's a likelihood that there could be some level of repetition at the state level, because also, like I said, you look at for the analysis when it comes to results, not everything that played out at the presidential elections will be playing out in the governorship elections, but there are certain trends that may remain. However, when you think around what would be seen for these elections, I do believe that for the state assemblies, you may have a bit more colors if you look to state assembly, because there you're looking at smaller state constituencies and how parties can perform at that location. But that would be a bit more different from the governorship elections. There are states where historically, there are parties that usually would take that state. I know we talked a lot around Borno State already. There's an expectation that it could have a repetition of what you've had, a consistency in the trends. But if you look at the map, you'll see that the results coming in are still from a few number of polling units. Now, the beauty of governorship elections is not just about the majority vote. And for these elections, there are states that will be competitive in a sense that it wouldn't be determined, the conversation would be around if a party secures the constitutional spread for those states. So while we still have results trickling in, because the ERAD and the platform we have on the screen is dependent on the results uploaded on the INEX result viewing portal. And to have the results on the ERAD projected, you need to first download the results from the IREV, and then it is imputed on the platform for better visualization. And so because we don't have sufficient numbers of polling units recorded now, it may not be, these colors may not remain the same as the process continues, or rather as the results are uploaded. And so we expect that some states that may be one particular color now, that the colors may change a bit much later into the morning. And that is because as results are collated and uploaded, they uploaded on the platform and put on the ERAD platform, the colors begin to change. And so we're expecting to see some states that are possibly green or red now change a bit, and some locations where you may have a blue change a bit. We still have states yet to put in the results. So where you have the color ash or gray, you know that we don't have the results yet for those states. And so as we observe the trends, we'll be looking forward to seeing how the elections would go out, would turn out. States to look out for, I'm looking forward to Adamawa, because one, we have a woman contesting there, and I need to just bring in the gender dynamics. It's interesting to see how the elections will turn out in Adamawa State. I know Zamfara would also be interesting because it was quite contentious in the pre-election space. And if you follow the conversation in 2019, Zamfara was one state where the APC had won the elections, but post the decision by the Supreme Court, the state had turned into a PDP state. However, as we moved towards the general elections, we had a lot of decamping to APC. So it became a bit of a very big competition between the APC and PDP. So you had people who moved from the PDP to the APC, hoping that the party would return back to an APC state, but you also had traditional PDP people who were also hoping to keep the state. And so Zamfara is going to be an interesting one to look out for. Katsina would also be interesting because we saw a little change in the trends in the presidential elections. And we don't know if that would be sustained in the governorship elections, but we keep watching to see how that would turn out. And I think for another state in the northwest that would be interesting, I already talked about Kano. Kano, we're yet to see what happens there, but the presidential elections showed that the NNPP was pulling its weight at that level for National Assembly. At least they had like 2 seats in the Senate. 2 of the 3 senatorial seats was won by the NNPP in Kano for the presidential elections. And they also had reasonable number of federal constituencies. Now, we wait to see what the trend would be for the governorship elections, but Kano is one state to watch out for. Interestingly, we have a PVT also deployed in Kano, and once INEC announces the results, we'll be going out with our data for Kano State. And I know Sokoto, we're looking forward to see what the outcome will be, but that's the conversion in the north. The south is always a bit more interesting, and the southwest, not so competitive because we don't have a lot of governorship elections going on there. You know, southwest is one region where 3 states from the southwest have off-cycle elections. So Ondo, Osun, and Ekiti already had off-cycle elections, so they basically just have state assembly elections. And so the states to watch out for in the southwest, Lagos, we're looking forward to seeing what the results would be like. But we still have Ogun, we still have Oyo, and in Lagos, in the western parts of the country. And those are important states to look out for, because we know that for US especially, where the governor was one of the G5 governors, we were waiting out to see what the outcome will be like for these elections. The numbers are still very few, so I can't really make any determinate statement around that. For the South-South zone, aside River, Bayelsa and Edo, they do not have governorship elections. We know that Rivers, like we talked earlier, we've discussed earlier, Rivers is a bit competitive. However, the challenge with Rivers is the fact that it's usually a bit more disruptive when it comes to trends of violence and thuggery. And that in itself plays out in how the results, or rather the outcome of the results. Rivers was one of the states Young Africa did call out for the presidential elections, where we believe that the results announced by the Electoral Commission for Rivers was inconsistent with our PPT data. But beyond that, we know that the trends for the presidential will be a bit different for the governorship, because Rivers also had a governor, incumbent, who was one of the G5 governors. And for the governorship, it seems to be quite contested. We're not sure what the results would be like, but it's a state to look out for in Rivers. Same also Akwa Ibom and Cross River states. For the southeastern states, Anambra already is an off-cycle elections. Imo, thankfully, is an off-cycle elections. Earlier, Eze mentioned about the senatorial district election in Imo State that basically inspired the provision in Section 65 of the Electoral Act, because Imo in itself is always very competitive, but we have trends of elections manipulation in that state. However, there's no governorship now. They just have state assembly. So the states to look out for is Enugu. Enugu is interesting because you know that for the presidential elections, the Labour Party took in Enugu, which originally or historically has been a stronghold of the PDP. Now, we're not sure how that would play out for the governorship election, but that is also a state to look out for. Same for Abia, where we see competition between the emerging Labour Party in the state, and then also for Ebonyi. Those are also, that's also an important state to look out for, especially because, you know, there was a move in Ebonyi or cross-carpeting that has somehow kept, made the state a bit more interesting in Nigeria's political scene.
Right.
But yeah, we keep watching to see what the results would look like as we move into the early hours of the morning.
Well, Cynthia has literally walked us through the length and breadth of Nigeria's political map. And just to keep us in tune with this illustration, APC is red. So the states you see red for now, it means APC. The Labour Party is yellow. That's the color that indicates Labour Party. The NNPP is blue, while the PDP is green. So just understand what those colors represent on the map. You know, I was going to save River State for Mr. Nwagu, but Cynthia already walked through that. But, you know, it's quite curious because in 1999, our map was a bit colorful. We had the APP as well, aside the AD and the PDP. But from 2015, 2019, we just got two colors, red and green. 2015, red and green. 2019. Now, I'm speaking to the 28 states that are holding this election. I'm not including, you know, for example, Anambra State, which is off cycle. So, Mr. Nwagu, I wonder for you, do you foresee stay with the two-color system, which we saw 2015, 2019, or do you foresee something more colorful? I mean, you could talk about Rivers, which I was keeping for you anyway.
Well, I think Rivers, like most South-South states, have actually remained dominantly position parties until the APC came in 2015. What used to be very contentious in those states were the internal party elections. That was what was very, so once you got the tickets off the party in any of those states, you are very clear that you are already governor. But the Rivers that you talked about, the splits, first and foremost between the dominant actors, Rotimi, former Governor Rotimi Amechi, and his then Chief of Staff, Nyesom Wike, and that conflict has lingered on, and then the intrusion of Magnus Abe also of the SDP has conflicted Rivers in a way that is clear. So there is a contestation for, for dominance. But as it stands, I think that the position party in that state, which is now I don't know whether it's still PDP, but whatever it is, the Wike faction of the PDP and the alliances that were built and the mismanagement of relationship by the other parties as well had, of course, that the Labour Party seemed to have collapsed its structure for the governorship. And that has to do with, of course, what played out during the presidential. But whatever it is a state to watch out for. I know that there is already people are already complaining about how the election has been managed and all of those things. But it's early in the day. By later today, we'll be able to know what has gone on in the state. But beyond all of that is the fact that the alliances and the dynamics of the presidential election will likely change in the governorship. And I say that especially if you remember in 2011 when President Muhammadu Buhari then virtually swept, Katsina. The CPC swept every available seats in that state. The governor then, Governor Shema, was virtually packing out of the government house, after the presidential election. But when the governorship came, the PDP came back, and the CBC was only able to retain only one state of Nasarawa. So there are a lot of things that were thrown into the docket for the presidential election, which may not necessarily play again in this governorship. If you go across the states, you will have seen that there were alliances, across-party alliances, especially in the southeast, where you just found out that it's like, okay, we are conceding this for you, but please do this for us. In Edo State, for instance, if you had seen the way they shared things, it's as if, look, we will support you here, but you leave this side for us. All of that is not going to play in the governorship. The governorship is about, and the ethnic, religious activism that you also saw in the presidential will not play very deeply. Because if you go to some states, for instance, the dominant religion may be Christianity, except you now break it down to whether you are Protestant or you're Catholic or you are all of those things. But at the end of the day, most of the issues that were top for the presidential are not in conversation for the governorship. And so we're likely going to see a lot of shocker in the governorship results. What many people anticipate, the parties that hold sway in the presidential may not necessarily hold sway because the whole dynamics. And a lot of people also do not pay attention to what is close. They are always about what is far away. We discuss the national budget. We discuss national elections. We don't discuss local government elections. We are talking about BVAS and IREV and IRAD for the national election. But the state elections, the state-conducted elections, the ones by the state independent electoral commissions, are out of our purview. Donors put money for national elections, they put money for, but they do not put money for those subnational elections. So the culture of subnational elections will permeate into the governorship because the real issues that then play out will be whether they want to retain somebody or not. So accountability issues is also very weak in the states because the structures of civil society, the structures of that raise the issues within those states are very weak. Unlike we are at the federal level, the voices are louder and all of those. So those dynamics are coming out early in the day today, and we will see what I think will be those shockers eventually.
Prime Minister Wago will be watching out for those shockers, as we call them. But let me talk to Mr. Arumidadi now. So, we did talk about, expectations, looking at the map now, we're used to, two dominant colors. So I'd like you to speak to, what we've had before, two dominant colors. Is it an advantage, for our democracy, or should we look forward to a multicolor map? Would that pay us better, as a country, talking about our democracy?
Well, I know there are people who always talk about the fact that maybe we should just have a two-party system, that perhaps that would stabilize our, politics and so on. But the danger with that narrative is that you may have, a two-party system that, in reality, in terms of lack of ideological differences, is actually, one party. And really, if you look at the APC and the PDP as presently constituted, they are just like, Siamese twins. In fact, the fact that if the national chairman of, the APC was a two-term governor under, PDP, you really have a whole lot of movements, here and there, and people can hardly differentiate. Perhaps that explains the mood by some set of Nigerians who felt if there is a third option that offers some form of hope, perhaps it could be illusory, it could be reality, let us embrace that. So for me, I think it would be good if this map, is altered, a bit, because it then gives some hope for all those people too, that there's something that we can, build on. And effectively, you could also have some, form of, thought force, imagine. Although whatever analysis we put forward here, we put on the table, or projections, have to be very, very tentative, because we also know that we live in the world of quicksands when you talk about the Nigerian, politics. Before you know it, people will claim that they have problems within their party, and you may still have defections. Nothing says that a week, 3 weeks after the inauguration of the president and the National Assembly, suddenly people may start moving from one political party to the other. And to that extent, we are not sure how this map will be sustained if it remains like this. But I think it will be good, because it would also give encouragement to other political parties to know that things can actually, change. If we were practicing, and I think I've made that point here before, that if Nigeria were practicing a parliamentary system or a representative system or proportional system, the picture would even be much more, different. In South Africa, if your party win 5% of votes, you're entitled to a certain number of seats. So it's based on percentages, because they have a hybrid system, presidential and parliamentary, which I would have really liked to see here, in Nigeria, because that way you see a situation where the states, parliaments would then be more plural. You really have political pluralism. But we are here with the presidential system, and we are stuck with it. And so the only way we can look at alternatives is for this kind of, picture to emerge. And then we can begin to do comparative analysis when it comes to performance. So it's not just APC, PDP. We're also talking about Labour Party. We're talking about NNPP, and possibly, some others. So for me, it is that hope that it gives, that a future is possible, that people of like minds could come together, sell their ideas, and Nigerians will buy it. One thing that I've seen in this electoral process is that the problem is not with the people. The people are prepared, they are ready to vote, even in spite of the threats and all kind of problems in some parts of the country. People still came out, to vote, and you could even see from the trend of results released so far that the other parties coming second in some of these places, and then the conduct of the people at the polling units themselves not really having problem identifying their political parties. I know there are some reported incidents where some compromised officials were assisting people to vote, but that would be in minority of cases. In majority of cases, I think people were really able to decide where they were voting. We even saw that more in the presidential and National Assembly elections, where some people knew this is the president they will vote for, and then for Senate and others, they voted for a different president entirely. So we saw all these things, and for me, it won't be a setback politically speaking if we have a more plural map of electoral sources at the level of different political parties.
And the issue of ideology, that also comes to the fore, because you did mention that you can't really differentiate between most of these parties.
We can't really differentiate, really. In fact, some have even argued that, well, Labour, because the Labour say Labour, so you expect that party to be for Labour, but at the same time, the presidential candidates, the leader obviously comes from the same setup, and he has been with them. But still, what is important is that you have people who felt that let's have these other alternative. And like I said, it will really be good for democracy, not just for the parties that are there now, but for the other political parties. Perhaps to realize that maybe there are things they were not doing properly that they could do better, and then people will begin to believe in them. I must mention this point. Somebody raised something quite interesting, and that was the fact that one of the things we were doing at the International Press Center as part of our election work, media election work, is to document the campaign promises of the presidential candidates. And then we did say that after the elections, we would publish the campaign promises of the winner. Of course, that would be the president-elect now. But somebody said, no, you shouldn't do that. You should publish all the campaign promises, because that is important for people to know what others have promised. Perhaps there are people who might then say, look, you have been elected, but this particular campaign promise from this candidate really strikes a chord with us. Why don't you implement it? Then people can also compare that perhaps if we had elected this person, it will, will be better off. So there are many ways in which we can really begin to, engage, in the process. My worry, taking it back to where we started about comparison with previous elections, is that the little problems we have really may actually overshadow the progress we're supposed to have made as far as this is concerned. So we might say that we didn't have the same level of incidents of disruptions like we've had in previous elections. And why not trying to say that we could really have perfection in anything? But then I also feel we'll be better off if we don't have, this kind of, incidents, because the physical manifestations may be different from the psychological impact, on the people. This election we really had, well, we'll look at the statistics, but obviously we also had many people who were voting for the first time. And you don't want a situation where that population will feel so bad about what has happened and say, oh, we won't vote again. I saw a young lady who came up and said, Nigeria is not worth dying for. We don't want to do any of these things really, because each election we complain about, voter apathy. And some of the factors responsible for that, we've seen it again. So if we don't address it, frontally, like, Eze said earlier on, it will continue to embolden these elements to feel that, oh, they may have all their electoral laws. All we need to do is to just suppress, voters in the area where we knew we're not going to win. And I see elements of, when one of the variables we looked at in the EMRI, Election Manipulation Risk Index, is INEC, capture. And I've been thinking, I've been ruminating, perhaps maybe when next we're developing EMRI, we would advise IAGA, maybe we need to have a category of maybe state capture or security capture. Because when you say security men are not doing their work, they should do their work, the reality too is that there are some people pulling the strings. Why it will be difficult? Because if the evidence is all over there. At least that is one thing that social media has established. Eze talked about the Bauchi commissioner that was on the line and then distributing money. But beyond that, we've also have videos across the country where people have been brave enough or courageous enough to capture what is happening. So if the police were to be looking for any evidence, they are already there. Yeah. But the average person will tell you nothing would happen. So how do we deal with this state capture at the level of the security agencies, at the level of the fact that people just feel that we're warlords and nothing could happen? Otherwise, the kind of thing that you see in rivers will not be happening again and again and again. If we don't take them seriously, not on the basis of the fact that, oh, well, it's not as preponderant as it used to be, then in future it might come to haunt us because it would have set another round of precedent, and then we continue to have, these problems.
Yeah.
So let's see how this map invariably,
one of the things that that came up, in the build-up of this election, a particular party was said not to have a structure, but
exactly,
at the tail end of everything, we saw how that party performed, and I'm thinking, 6 million votes without a structure, and most of the people who voted, I believe, are not card-carrying members of that party. They were just young people who just wanted to see something different. So I'm thinking, do you think we're ready for independent candidature?
Well,
I got you there, right?
We might be ready. Well, yeah, because it's one of the things.
Because I believe they went with the candidates.
Yeah, it's one of the things we've really agitated for or advocated for in the past, that let's have an independent candidate so that people can then vote for you on your merit.
Yeah.
But I must also say that that would have its own challenges in the context of Nigeria, because even the the candidacy of Obi, for example, one of the things that people were saying, perhaps maybe why some people probably didn't vote for him, was the fact that, look, your party don't control anything. You don't have senators, you don't have whatever. If you become a president, would they allow you to even perform? So when you talk about an independent candidate, people would say, look, what would you be able to do if you don't belong to any of these, political parties? That could really be a very delicate. There's nothing wrong in providing for it, because again, we have to be very careful about our assumptions. And I think we are learning a lot of lessons, really, because when at the point you made about structure, it's quite important, because people took this thing like, look, you just have to have, structures, and they kept defining structure as what it means is that you must have. You must control, you must have officials at all levels, that is what is called, structure. But a new structure has emerged, and the fact that is the people really are the structure. And I guess the politicians have taken so many things, for granted, and not reading, the mood, of the people. Even in some discussions, too, I tell people that I see some changing mood in the country. And that is what we have seen. Like you said, without structure, suddenly somebody is able to talk about 6 million votes. So now we also have to begin to discuss. I mean, we now have a new something to discuss politically. Yeah. What exactly is a structure? What makes a structure? And for us not to just
political
begin,
science,
exactly, political scientists will really have something to do, really. And we have to be very careful with our assumptions. We assume a lot, and the underlying factor is that. We tend to take, the people for granted. We assume, and I will feel that in their sober moments, because most of the things that happened in the past couple of days were out of the fact that people just wanted to win, and somehow some of the politicians or parties adopted the philosophy of all is fair in war, just for them, to win. But in their sober moments, I'm hopeful that people will then reflect and say, maybe there are things we're not doing, properly, because it could not be that these results that we had, at least at the level of presidential election, meant it was just because a particular tribe, for example, voted in some way. Yeah. That cannot, be the case, really. Absolutely. We just had, people across. You may have more sentiments in one area than the other, but people across board were just expressing themselves in different ways. Absolutely. And I hope that would really make people to realize that perhaps we'll be taking, people for granted, and that democracy is not just about relying on your so-called, structures, settling them, without realizing that you have a level of lack of fulfillment out there on the part of the
So
people.
let's look at the people more as a structure.
Exactly, because at the end of the day,
well, like,
it's all
you know,
about the people.
like you said, political science students have their work cut out for them as to what is structure really. But let me quickly run to Abuja, you know, and get Cynthia's reaction. Cynthia, I mean, the question, you know, is begging for answers. Mr. Ogundade, you know, is beginning to wonder, you know, that political science students, you know, would begin to, you know, crack their heads, you know, to talk about what a structure is. But we saw, you know, in the presidential elections how things panned out, and we're beginning to think, is Nigeria ready, you know, for that independent candidature?
Well, I think for the elections, we need to first understand the complexities of running national elections. And yes, I'm one of the advocates for independent candidacy, but maybe not at the presidential level. And I would give different examples, because for even countries, I know Kenya, for instance, have independent candidacy. But you notice that even within the Kenyan politics, you have mostly independent candidates running for legislative offices. And then for the presidential elections, you see a lot of alliances across political parties, because the thing is, running a national elections for the office of the president is beyond just a personality. It's about the ability to rally votes across a majority of the people, spread across different parts of the country. And to do that, you need individuals who are engaging at those levels. And it's difficult for one person running as an independent to achieve that, because you also need to have people who are working within a system of a political party to rally for votes across that. So while I would say, yes, independent candidacy is something to consider, but I still think that for our electoral system, for the presidential elections, there's still that requirement, at least to have a political party that is engaging. And I'll give you different reasons why that is important. One, when it comes to elections, we need to also understand that it's beyond the office of the president, because elections happen, we vote, but there's the governance that happens after we vote. And to run a system, especially the presidential system of government that we have, where you have an executive working with a parliament. Now, to make decisions, a president needs to, you need to easily negotiate or reach a consensus with the parliament, so that policies or directives or executive agendas presented at the parliament receive speedy attention. But if a party in power at the presidential level do not have some measure of control in the National Assembly, be it at the Senate and the House, you would almost have a governance that is stagnant, because decisions there'll be difficulty in reaching consensus on decisions that will be made. You're going to have issues of national interest stalled at that level, because it's difficult to even rally support within the National Assembly. And so when we talk around elections, we should also remember that elections operate within a context, that we vote for leaders, but we vote for leaders to perform on specific responsibilities. That's one part of it. The other part is it's easier to hold political parties accountable to their agenda when you know what the party policy is, the party manifesto, and the party ideology. We know that, yes, our political parties are yet to be fully developed, because we still have individuals who move across party lines. You can't always say which party stands for, even the way they engage post-elections. But the idea is to build institutions of political parties that are quite democratic and represent the interest of the people. And to do that, it's easier to engage with an institution than to engage with a personality. Because what we want to avoid also is to have a system where you have individuals who run as heroes or messiah. That is not the idea of democracy. The idea of democracy is accountability. And it's easier to drive accountability through institutions where you know that individuals are accountable not just to their party, but they're accountable to the people. So there are different layers of accountability, which is why when we talk about independent candidacy, I still believe that at least for the office of the president, there's that need for some sense of an institution. The other conversation is perhaps what Mr. Lanre mentioned. Do we want to review our electoral system to introduce some level of hybrid? I know the Waste Committee did propose that we adopt a mixed system of proportional representation with our first past the post. The idea for that proposal in the Waste Committee, which is what I believe what Mr. Arongodade is also talking, is it reduces the tension when it comes to competition and creates that real sense of multi-party democracy, in the sense that for specific offices, especially for legislative elections, that you give more parties the opportunities for representation at the national and state assemblies. That way, it creates some level of diversity in those houses of government, in those chambers. The other thing is it also makes competition less tense, in the sense that the do-or-die politics that we have and would be managed a bit, which is why I do believe that it's important we start having that conversation. Do we want to test a system of a hybrid, a mix of both first past the post and proportional representation, just to give that sense that is beyond two parties, that you have other parties who do have agendas to present in both chambers. And then I think that is a conversation post the elections, because it does require amendment to the Constitution. And for me, the third part of this conversation is just looking at the presidential elections that we've had. There is a conversation around voters who say, I would not vote because my candidate did not win. And I think we need to understand that democracy or elections is a game of numbers. There would always be winners, there would be losers. There is no system where everyone wins, in the sense that everyone who contested won an elections. But what matters is that elections is beyond voting, that even after the process, the individuals for those who voted and those who did not vote, that we have a responsibility to hold every elected official accountable, because at the end of the day, they represent the population, every one of us, regardless of whether we voted for them or not. And saying that I would not vote again because my candidate did not win is not the real sense of democracy. It means we don't understand our role as a people. Because the idea is we vote, even if our candidate does not win, we begin to engage. It doesn't mean that because my candidate did not win, I will not vote again. That's one arm of it. The other part is we have new parties who made it into the National Assembly. So even if your candidate did not win, are we developing an agenda to hold our representatives accountable in the National Assembly? Because it's one thing to win an elections. Actually, it's another thing to now represent the people based on your agenda. So for voters who voted, whether your party or your candidate won the presidential elections or not, what is the plan to hold the representatives whom you voted for in the House of Reps and in the Senate and subsequently the state assemblies? Because if we focus solely on the office of the president, we would not achieve the development that we want. And I think from this election, what we need to learn as a people is that elections or democracy is not driven by one individual. It's not about one person at the top. Governance is not about one person at the top. It's about what every arm of government is doing and working together to achieve a joint purpose. And that, for me, is the next level of conversation. That as Nigerians, it's beyond who we voted for as the president. How are we going to hold our lawmakers accountable in the National Assembly? How are we going to hold our state lawmakers accountable in the State Assembly and the governors accountable? Because if we can even begin to hold them accountable to represent us properly, then we can start achieving the benefits of multi-party democracy, where we know that conversations in the National Assembly, for instance, are driven by ideologies of the parties involved, informed by the interest of the people. Because if we go into the 10th Assembly and what we end up seeing are just individuals who are not sure on what their roles are as lawmakers, then it means that all this celebration of the colors we're seeing in the map it amounts to nothing. Because the reason we're celebrating the colors and the sense of multi-party democracy is the fact that we want to see different ideas and different innovation in how laws are made, in how oversight is performed, and in how representation is delivered on. And if we cannot achieve that, then all this celebration would amount to nothing. And for me, our democracy we begin to feel the dividends of democracy when, as a people, we know that elections will not just all end at the ballots, that it continues post the voting on how we engage and how we demand for accountability as we engage. And for all the contenders, because what we see mostly is after elections, the major contenders become silent in the next elections. Because one of the things, especially for the Labour Party that is emerging now as a new third party in our democracy, is how the party begins to drive the national agenda post the elections.
Indeed.
Because if the party remains silent, it would mean that it was all about the presidential elections for this electoral cycle. And for me, it's beyond that. We need to start seeing that diversity of opinions and ideas drive governance, and we need to see citizens engage beyond the electoral process.
So citizen engagement, vibrant opposition, I mean, elections is just one step. We need to actually follow through with participation in governance. Well, Cynthia, I wasn't sure if that was a class in governance, voter education. It just packed everything all in one. But you know what? I'd like us to take a historical perspective to this conversation as well, because this is where we are. I mean, right now with the 2019 governorship elections. Don't forget, we're focused on the ERAD is giving us a benefit of a state election. So this is where we are. Two colors from the 2019 governorship elections, APC and the PDP. Don't forget, we're focusing on the 28 states that are holding elections, that held elections yesterday. But let's go all the way back to the beginning, and I'm talking about the beginning of the Fourth Republic. That's 1999. Interestingly, we didn't always have two colors, and that's what we were referencing earlier on. We had three colors. The PDP, you know, have been dominating from the scratch, really, with 17 states. The APP, just in case a lot of people may have forgotten, for new voters, there was a party called the APP, actually, the All People's Party. And, you know, with 8 states, majority of that in the northern part of the region, the northern region of the country, and the Alliance for Democracy, AD, of course, at the southwest region. So we had three colors there. Fast forward to 2003, 3 colors, even though AD diminished, APP now split, and then ANPP came out, still staying in the north, the PDP clinching a few more states again. 2003, we still had 2007 rather, we still had the 3 colors. AD had become AC. You know, it's actually amazing how our political transition has gone. The same players, different jerseys, as they say, different teams, really. So ANPP is still there, the PDP, 3 colors. 2011, we had a 4th player, the CPC. A lot of people will remember how that played out. Still the ANPP, AC, and the PDP. 2015, we started the 2-party system, in quote, up until 2019. I'd like to ask Mr. Nwagu, seeing how, would I say, dynamic the political space has been, can you speak to us as to why do we vote the way we do as Nigerians? Seeing that trend, what are the key factors that decide how Nigerians vote? I know we've talked about the possibility of independent candidacy and all of that, but seeing this, you know, this trend, why do Nigerians, or why do we vote the way we vote? Yes, I said that earlier, Mr. Nwagu.
Well, I enjoyed the class that Cynthia put us through, and the perspective that Comrade Aregungidade brought. I think that independent candidacy is a democratic nicety. It's a nicety to the point that I don't know which country of the world that is ruled by an independent candidate. I'm still searching. America since 1850 has come around a 2-party formation, even though it has over 400 political parties, and about 13 or thereabout are on the ballot. You know, for us here, the truth is, do we, in the true sense of it, have political parties, or we have vote catching machines? When we transited from military to civilian government, there was the birthing of a political party. The PDP, and then the APP, the AD, and the ACN, as they evolved, were virtually political parties that you could, it was even rumored that an individual wrote the manifesto of almost those four parties at that time. Now, where we are, there was ABGA. I was looking at that map. I was wondering whether ABGA disappeared, because in the southeast, for instance, the ABGA held sway with the domineering presence of the late Odimegwu Ojukwu, and through that process, there were breakages where, for instance, the party of Ojus Okalu won Imo, the PPA, where Ohakim was elected the governor after the then governor of the state, who was PDP. PPA won that election only for Ohakim to come back to PDP when the owner of that political party also moved away from PPA, and PPA died almost a natural death. It was only held as a party until the registration that took place. We also know that in the north, for instance, you also had the DPP, the Democratic People's Party, which Atahiru Bafrawa, who broke away from the APP then, formed the DPP, and the DPP was also making some wave until the Atahiru himself left the party and went back, and the DPP died. This Labour Party that is winning now, Mimiko had used it when he had challenges with President Obasanjo and won the party in Ondo State and ran his second term under the Labour Party. And when Mimiko left the party went back to recess. So the question you're asking me, how do our people vote, is about, first and foremost, ownership. The parties are not owned by the people. There are owners of the party. And those owners of the party determine who gets what within those parties. And the central dominating thing is about patronage and cronyism. It's about allocation of resources. So it's not about, even those who make a pretense about ideology, there are ideological parties in Nigeria today. The PRP is an ideological party. It exists. The AAC is an ideological party. It exists. The reason we flock to the dominant political parties is that over a period of time, they have had access to the public till and have built strength and are able to dispense patronage and all of those things. So the idea is a failure of expectation in this allocation moves the other people, because the fluidity of this movement cannot be ideological. The discussion we are having about Labour Party today is that somebody who ran as governor under ABGA, he was governor under ABGA, he moved from ABGA to PDP. From PDP, he contested up to 2019. He was a vice presidential candidate of a political party. Up to 2022, he kept supporting. 2021, he supported candidates in that PDP. By 2022, he became a presidential candidate of another party. And this fluidity of movement tells you that it is not about delivery to the Nigerian people. It is about still who controls the ability to dispense this patronage and issues. So we are not voting to make any change. So those who say there are no ideological parties may miss it. There are ideological parties, and those parties have been consistent in terms of what they are driving. What does these parties represent? What do they stand for in terms of the education? What do they stand for in terms of housing? What are they saying in terms of governance, in the country? In the last 40 years, the way of governing the country has remained the same. Whether it is PDP, APC, or whichever party that you have had, it is about capital. It is about selling. It is about monetization. It is about privatization. It is about commercialization. It is about, no party is discussing spending in public education. Nobody is talking about how do we fund health. No party is talking about how do we democratize, transportation in a way that more and more people have access to, transportation. how are we talking about what kind of, what do they call it, social security system can we put in place? Not the tokenistic, from you win to this, but you see copycatting that does not in reality advance the desire of the Nigerian people. So if the conversation is about shifting the needle from where we are right now, then we need to get back to real conversations about how do we want our country to be governed. And that, I think, is the issue that Cynthia was raising. Governance is beyond electing these people. When we tell you the heroes that you have created, they have clear foot. And the reason we do that is that every year, the reason we elect people is that they don't have shoes. The other one is very honest. This other person is wearing one wristwatch. The other one is very generous. He's a philanthropist. How does this advance the core issues that bother the Nigerian people? And we tailor these conversations in a way that make them appealing to the ordinary people. Oh, the young people of Nigeria, they are making changes. Young people of Nigeria are intersectional. They are not, these young people who came to vote, they didn't vote in one direction. They voted according to their ethnicity. They voted according to their religion. They voted their realities where they come from. And the eco-urban chamber conversation that we are having, that is driven by social media, does not represent the youth in Ikole Ekiti. It does not represent the youth in Kaura Nomoda. It does not represent the youth in my village in Ifezini Itembise. So when we have these conversations and we are channeling them the way we are doing, we are taking away the ability of Nigerians to become interested in what matters most. What matters to Nigerians is not who is running the show. What matters to Nigerians is that you are today having more private universities than you have investment in public education, public universities. Since 1999 till today, you have had over 100 and something strikes in public education. That is not a conversation that is on the table. As we speak now, you say your hospitals are not, public hospitals are not functioning, but there has been more private hospitals that have been, and state-of-the-art private hospitals exist in the country for the rich. The ordinary people cannot access health. As we speak now, there are more private universities that have been built, more houses, private houses, private estates have emerged under this democracy, this 1999 to today, than you have houses for the poor and the vulnerable. So those are the conversations for me. You dragged me into this. I thought that we would just have sweetheart conversations about how, people, but the truth is that we are voting patronage and cronyism, and that's what this thing is about. When you discuss with people and they tell you about corruption and all of that, it is only to the extent that if they talk corruption, it is that other people are corrupt. If you talk about, opportunism that comes with employment, it is that they are the ones getting it. If they are not the ones getting it, then it's okay. So we need to steer away from those kind of conversations and push our country to the point where there has to be a debate about how we even want this country to be run.
Well, Mr. Wagu, to be fair, that's still a sweetheart conversation. It's because you love Nigeria, and that's why you are raising these issues. So let's just still categorize it under sweetheart conversation. But these are important points to make, and I know Ladi wanted to come in at some point.
Because, looking at, where we are, right now in this country, the next, the president-elect is going to inherit a 77 trillion naira debt. We have inflation, just came out for February, 21.9%, unemployment rate over 33%, and on and on. Looking at the UK now, when Liz Truss came out with her mini budget, people were not satisfied, and she had to go. How do we make our process, get it to that level where if we're not satisfied, because 4 years is a long time to wait, 8 years is a long time to wait. Looking at the state of the economy right now, how can we checkmate the people that are leading us on time without having to wait so long, either for 4 or 8 years?
Well, I think part of it is what we've already stated, the point that Cynthia and Eze were making, that democracy goes beyond elections. There is a concept which we've developed and talk about these days of democratic accountability, holding people accountable to their promises. part of it is what we're doing as an organization, documenting campaign promises of presidential candidates. In the states, civil society, the media needs to know the campaign promises, of the governors. That is where it starts from. What you've promised, how are you doing it, and how will you do it? Almost all these promises are actually not new. And the critical question we should be asking is how? What difference would you make? Everybody has always said, I will provide, I will make education available, we'll take care of, health care, we'll make the economy work, we'll take away subsidy. How exactly would you do it that at the end of the day would have, a country where, the common man has a stake? Because part of the apathy that we see in the voting system comes from, alienation, the fact that people just feel we're not part of it. It's also one of the reasons why people get induced. So we may blame politicians for vote buying, but there are citizens who also feel that it's all I can possibly get, much as we condemn it, but they just have that feeling that they know these politicians will go away. They know that the councillor that is elected will leave that area and go, if it's Lagos, probably relocate to Lekki and get a house there. They won't see that, councillor again. And it also partly informs the kind of political parties that, we're building, that the parties that don't really belong to the people. And I'm glad that Eze helped to fill that gap in the narrative to say that it's not as if we don't have political parties that are not ideological. In fact, there are some that, even from their name, are ideological, but they were deregistered because they couldn't win votes, like, the Socialist Party of Nigeria. And that's why we felt, let's have this hybrid. Perhaps it would also give some of these people-oriented parties opportunity to be represented in parliament, and then things can begin to happen, at those levels. We should also manage our expectations, really, because we are having a global economic crisis. Nigeria is very, very vulnerable when you look at the global economy, in the sense that we're largely, up to now, still import, dependent. We don't have, industries working. Our educational system, our healthcare system have become what you could call, feeders of those systems in other places. Once you have a young girl going to an international competition, being the best, in mathematics, being the best in the one field or the other, before he or she comes back from that competition, she's been offered a scholarship by Harvard and so on, because those societies, even as we think that they are not perfect, value all those things. They know that they have to build their, potential, for the future. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that any government that will succeed in Nigeria today need to look back, need to look in the direction of the youths, the young people who have shown their capability, particularly in the field of IT, technology. I was telling, the lawyer who was here earlier on, that beavers didn't really come from outer space. It came from within. IT experts within INEC who felt less advanced beyond the card reader. And then we have, beavers. And we're looking at how can we use technology to improve our elections. I have the confidence here that our youths, much as we think that, they are a generation that does not think and so on, among them we can still tap some potential that can develop, all these things. So we need to look in that direction. We need to realize that the educational system, the universities are drivers of development in any society. Any society where you are having your, your think tank collapsing, you are going to have, problem. And that is what we see, because in all those places, there's not a single, let me say, invention in terms of weapon that comes out in America, for example, that the universities do not have an input. Often it will be that the Pentagon or whatever you call it might decide that, okay, we want to have a jet that can do these kind of things. And then that is the idea. But the conceptualization, the whole idea of the technology that will propel it and everything, there are contracts that go to the universities. And that is how, at least when you talk of the capitalist system, the way it works in other places. So the human capital, really, it's very, very important. And any government that does not deal with that, and that is what we need to ask them, to do. what exactly, is your plan? It's not really about, well, yes, it's good because every parent wants their children to go to school and within a time that they are planned for them, to come out. But then, how do we ensure that they have, a functional educational, system? Because one thing that is sometimes missing in our narrative is that we think things have always been like this. We think that we never had in Nigeria that didn't work, and it's because it's been so long that you had it and people felt that it never really happened. I mean, just to draw the analogy of football, is when people tell you that Arsenal, forget if I'm an Arsenal fan, if you ask somebody who is 20, 30 years, they'll say, oh, Arsenal has never won a title, which is not true.
Right.
In my university days at the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, what people don't know is that University of Ife had, well, maybe still has, a farm that it was in fact almost bigger than the main campus itself. That farm was producing food, were producing agricultural products, including up to cattle, whatever you call it, yam and everything, which they were selling in the market and which they were using to subsidize the feeding system. So if we said that a meal ticket when we were at the university was 50 kobo, it was because of that kind of system, that kind of educational, system that knew that, students need to concentrate. So in our days, you might be on that campus for 5 to 10 years, depending on what is keeping you there, and don't have anything yet to do with the town. Yeah. Because it was like a self-sufficient, environment where whatever you needed was quite available. That model, we need to look at it, but it's a model that also needs, people, to manage. So it was like the kind of integrated system, and that was why Ife now had other campuses. In Ibadan, you had the one that is called, More Plantation Institute of Agricultural Studies. So you had a kind of both, practical, whatever, and then the theoretical. So you saw everything, and for me, that kind of thing helped, our society, to move forward. We also need some not new models of leadership. We've also seen some models of leadership where, leaders essentially came and let people realize that I don't have to change dramatically because I've been in government. And that is the kind of tradition we also saw in some parts of Nigeria, where you had in Kaduna State, for example, Balarabe Musa, who had a bungalow. I want to assume that it was his own bungalow, and was governor, even though he was impeached, and left government and simply went back to that bungalow. We have so many examples like this. Yeah. I think this is what we need, to begin, to demand. But since we are running a political party system, it also starts, with those political parties. And for me, everybody must know that if democracy will yield what we have, they need to make input. So if we are going to have the best of the people that will be elected in terms of fulfilling this, then it's the time for all of us to begin to put together our own demands. Yes, they've had their manifestos, but let everybody get organized. Whether you were labor, where in the media, and so on, this is what, we really want. And I feel that way, things, can begin to change. But then we need to just manage our expectations, because most of these things are just, like I said earlier on, you want to win election, and you just need to say something.
And you make all those promises.
And you make all those, promises.
You don't fulfill the promise, we should be able to say, you know what?
I agree with you.
We don't want
in fact, that is the standard. It's actually the basic measure of democracy. That when you have a government that has not, performed, then you do something about that government. That's why in America, midterm elections always reflect that.
Exactly.
So if you have this government, and maybe at the national level they failed, in the midterm elections, you see that they will just change, the composition of the National Assembly, which would always reflect, the mood of the people.
So as it stands, I mean, we don't have that luxury.
Exactly. We do.
To do that. So, like, also to cite examples, we saw what happened in 2012 with the subsidy, fuel subsidy protest. I mean, is that also an option? Because he made mention of a lot of issues that the incoming government will face. I mean, so if you look at last year, if you count the number of months that students were home, so there's that. You're hearing, okay, subsidy will be taken off. There's just so many of these problems and challenges, that we expect to see a quick fix. But most likely we won't see. I mean,
because we have to manage expectations.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly, we have to manage expectations till another 4 years before we can do something. So protesting, peaceful protesting, I mean, is that an option? Because we saw how it panned out, in 2012. The nation actually came to a standstill, So should citizens, take that option? Even though we know how it ended in 2012, there was a military presence, dispersed everybody, To what extent can people, take protest as a means and remain resolute, until, their demands are met?
Well, democracy does not exist if people don't have the right to protest. And one danger that I've seen over the years is attempt to criminalize dissent, to say that, any gathering, or instill fear into people and say, if you protest, then it would end, like EndSARS. It's not automatic, and it's not all that way. And sometimes it's even worse. When you suppress people, they become, anarchistic and express it in other ways. So I quite agree with you that as citizens, we must assert, our right, to speak out, to protest in different ways, to be able to. If you feel that things are not happening the way you want, it could be at the level of a professional body, it could be at the level of a union. You have people that you have elected. You should be able to, march to the parliament, because it also helps to remind those people of the kind of thing. Because the problem we see is that those who have been part of such movements before, when they're in government, they suddenly feel that, they have all the answers, and once you do it, then you have been sponsored by the opposition. I would just say that as citizens, we should not, be intimidated, because it helps to build, democracy. Nobody has a monopoly of ideas. Yeah. No matter how much you come with, by the time you get there, you realize that you need other segments of society to bring forward, their own ideas. And that, for me, it's very, very critical if we are going to make, this democracy to work. So let's have, the right of dissent. We should not, criminalize it. We should have. Sometimes if we want to be polite, we say, constructive engagement and the rest of them. Because our leaders sometimes understand more the language, of protest. Because when you've really exhausted all channels, then you ask yourself, what do we do? And then people say we should do things new way. I quite agree. But our leadership, too, must learn to do things in new ways. Because that is just the beauty of democracy. We won't be where we are if we look at it in terms of history, if at a point in time people didn't ascertain the right, to protest. Exactly. The fact that at a stage, the nationalists felt we cannot continue like this. Exactly. They marched on the streets. In the 1945, even the trade unions, went on strike action. Those were the things that led to independence. And under the military too, we did that. We know we are now in a democracy. And so people will say, you have the parliament. One way we can also engage the parliament is by, occasionally carrying our placards there and saying that we've elected you, this is what we should do. But for citizens, let us also look at, now we talk about structure, the structures that we know exist. The fact that every senator, every House of Representative member have what is called constituency office. Right. The fact that, they've been elected. And so let us also see some level of organization that goes beyond, partisanship. I know it will be difficult, but there's nothing wrong that says that in a senatorial district, market women, professionals cannot come together and say, we just want to have an audience with you as our senator, as our elected representative, that there are some things we want to bring to your attention. I can say authoritatively here that where we've adopted that approach, even here in Lagos, we had seen some results. Because I could recall, I think it was the year 2004, because in 2003 I was briefly in politics. I ran for Senate, Lagos West, and I visited some areas. And while campaigning in Amu Ward of Fin, I discovered that there were communities there that didn't have public schools, didn't have electricity or anything. And then going back to my work, we went there with some journalists. We got people in that community and said, why are you like this? And they said, well, we don't have opportunity to meet, our leaders. We engaged them. They had spokespersons, including a woman who was a hairdresser, who said that in that community, because there was no light, when the women are doing their hair, instead of having the hair dryer, they asked them to stand in the sun so that their hair could dry. So we just organized them. And they had an audience, I could recall vividly, with Senator Afikuyomi then. Then we met the House of Reps person then. Then finally, we met the then Commissioner for Education in Lagos State, who is late now, I think, Professor Lawa.
Mr. Rogadi.
Those people speak. But at the end of the day, what that achieved was that through that, schools, public schools was built in that, they call it Igbo Alijo and whatever. I just said that so that people can know the power that they could have.
This your experience is something we'll explore some other time, because it's shocking to a lot of people to hear that you've had your political experience. But we need to anchor this conversation at this point. This is where we are with the ERAD. The results are still coming in, but don't worry, it's still the early days or early hours, whatever you want to call it. But we'd like to thank our analysts, ERAD analysts, Mr. Larry Arogundade, Cynthia Mbamalu in our Abuja studio, as well as Mr. Ezenwa Nwagu. Thank you so much for your time on the program this morning. We know you will be back, so let's allow you just, well, I'm not sure you would sleep, but let's allow you watch behind the scenes, and then we'll get back to you very soon. Thank you once again, lady and gentlemen, for your time.